Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I am Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about the finale of Survivor Kaorong. It's a little bit later than we would have ideally preferred to record, but think of it this way. We are prolonging the Survivor experience for you all. This way, you get to be reminded of the finale, and it just lets you keep it in your mind even longer. That's me putting a shiny spin on scheduling problems.
Yes.
The scheduling in particular, though, was that I was in Colorado for my brother to get married, so that's a good thing.
Yes. He was successfully married?
Yes, it worked.
Yes.
The ritual was completed. So, as previously mentioned, we're here to talk about the finale. So do we want to just cover general thoughts first? You have anything you just itching to get into before we go into the play-by-play?
No. I mean, I was content with it. I enjoyed what they did. I enjoyed the way that it turned out. I enjoyed the way the fake out between, going to the final. Where they still had this challenge. Like, they managed to find a way to use that time without actually taking it down to a 2. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was a very satisfying and what turned out to be a very good season.
It sounds like you were a little bit more satisfied with it than I was. Not that I was entirely unhappy, because that was one thing that was nice coming into the finale, is feeling that I kind of like everybody who's left. And that didn't really change, except that I still am just feel a little bit dumbstruck at how so many more people thought Michelle deserved to win over Aubrey. I mean, I don't dislike Michelle. I thought she did a good job, but it just seemed so obvious to me that Aubrey's game was stronger. So I'm a little bit befuddled at their decision-making process. That's all.
Yeah, it didn't feel, though, to me like when Russell didn't win, because they were voting basically to not give him money.
Yeah.
This didn't feel like there was any punishment of Aubrey. It just felt like the way that this group worked, like the game that they had more affinity for was Michelle's, like the way that she had navigated that and didn't have those emotional outbursts and was strong at the end, and didn't have to piss anybody off the way that Aubrey did. I was happy with either of them winning, because I don't think that this was a vote against Aubrey. I think that this was just the way she managed to read these people correctly and played up to them.
I guess. I mean, I agree that it doesn't.
I didn't think she was going to win, honestly. I thought when, they said that by keeping her, that they had essentially just handed Aubrey $1 million when they had the chance to get rid of her. I thought that was what was going to happen, but
yeah, I guess. I mean, I see what you're saying. I tend to agree that
it's in my feelings. I mean, this is not a
well, no, and I guess what I'm just thinking through my own feelings on it, which is just that I agree with you that it definitely didn't seem like a vindictive vote. Like, oh, we're just going to reward Michelle because we don't want Aubrey to win. Like, I agree. That's not what it feels like. But I guess I had such a strong feeling the other way that between the two of them, I thought Aubrey's game was significantly stronger. It doesn't make Michelle's bad, but I guess I don't see it. Just again, as a relative, on their relative merits, it seemed like one was much better than the other, and I was just surprised that so many people disagreed, including people like Debbie, who seemed primed to vote for Aubrey.
It's hard to explain it.
Well, you know, I mean,
she was clearly working the social game, and not that like she was friends with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's where I think that she did a really good job. Is it wasn't just about being friends with everybody; it was about persuading everybody that what she was doing was the best way to play. Like, so they had an affinity to her, which is why they were more naturally inclined to be persuaded. But she was utilizing that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just automatically be like, "Oh yeah, we really like Michelle. I get a good feeling from her, so I'm gonna vote for her." Like, she was able to turn that feeling into votes, and you have to give her some credit, or you don't have to. I give her credit for that.
I definitely give Michelle credit that she played a great game, and I can't be that upset. I don't feel like this is a epic tragedy, unrewarded robbing of Aubrey, as much as I just feel like I just disagree with the decisions that the jury made. You know what I mean? It's like it's not an indictment of Michelle as much as just surprise on my part that that's how the jury felt.
Yeah,
because that's not what I predicted at all. It's not how I would have chosen. You know, I guess it's what it comes down to. But I guess for me, Michelle, just only in comparison, her game suffers a lot by the fact that really for the first 2/3 of the game, she really wasn't doing anything. She is almost admitted as much. And she played strong from there on, but she kind of just really did get, you know, maybe we can say it took her a while to find her footing, but that also just means that she just didn't do anything for half the game and did get carried along. And then when she kicked into gear, yeah, she did great. But I feel like Aubrey was kind of doing stuff all throughout. And yeah, there were some bumps in the road, but I mean, I feel like she orchestrated the shape of the game far more than Michelle did. But I guess that's not the only criteria. So, you know, I guess it's true that when you are more proactive, you run the risk of more antagonization of the people who are on the jury, as opposed to Michelle, who kind of by virtue of not doing as many moves, didn't make as many people mad.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to overstate this because I liked Michelle going in. I thought she did a great job. She really kind of, you know, halfway through the season, we were still talking about how she never said anything. But I think she really did emerge as a strong player. So I don't want to overstate the point, just as other than the fact that I was really expecting it to be a dominating Aubrey win right up until when Jeff actually read the votes. Like, even through the final tribal council, I was still thinking that's what was going to happen. Maybe I was biased just by that being my own opinion. Quite possible.
Yeah, see, I didn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Like, I didn't get that, like, a feeling like that, you know? I think what I'm trying to think about how to, like, I'm not trying to argue with you because I agree with your point of view. I guess I'm trying to just more explain myself, like, why I felt this was satisfying. And I think what I liked so much about Michelle's game is that she essentially was the player who it's like could have just made the argument, well, I made it this far and you didn't, so it doesn't matter if I coasted for part of it. Or, she didn't use that. Like, she was the kind of person, like, that was kind of her argument, is like, hey, I made it to the end and I did what I had to do at the times when I had to do it. But when I didn't have to do anything, why did I need to be doing anything, And it didn't feel as much to me as like, oh, I was just being carried and staying under the radar, She did say, it took me a while to find my footing. But what I felt like that was more of like not just saying like, hey, I just didn't need to do shit, so why? But in a nicer way of saying that. So I felt like she owned that type of game and actually used that type of game where it was an actual gameplay strategy, not just, oh, shit, I happen to be at the end. I guess I better make that. The argument is that me making it here is enough. She actually played to get there. She won some immunities. When it was time to choose sides, she chose the right sides that didn't upset people, and she maneuvered when she needed to maneuver, and when she didn't, she just didn't. She just stayed friendly with people and maintained relationships. I thought it was, she didn't necessarily manipulate or drive the game, but as far as the, outlast, outplay, and whatever, I mean, she did all that better, as good, if not better than everybody else. So.
I mean, I'm fully accepting here that this is two different styles of play, and therefore it's subjective to decide whose was better, right? So, like, that's not
right. And I'm not trying to argue
here.
Better.
Yeah,
I'm arguing why I felt a satisfaction that this was a good end.
I think when I talk about not being satisfied, it's almost less about being mad and more about being frustrated in the sense that I thought I had it figured out. And then a bunch of people, 5 of them, made decisions different than what I thought they were going to do. And I don't fully understand why. I mean, we were talking through some of it, but I guess I just still feel like the line in the final tribal council that would have sold me, even if I wasn't already there, for Aubrey was pointing out, I have been on the right side of every single vote since the merge. And I just mean, like, Michelle was kind of carried along through several votes at that point, was on the outside for a significant chunk, managed to work her way back in, which is certainly significant, but she was having to scramble because she was not in control of the game really at any point.
Till the very end.
Well, that's true. That's certainly true. I mean, she won a clutch immunity when it really mattered. She would have been the one to go, and she won the right one. That's for sure. So, no question about that. And again, anything negative I say about her is kind of only comparatively speaking, because I really did like her, and so I'm not mad that she won. I'm just surprised. That's all. Just because, again, that's not who I would have voted for, but that's okay. It's subjective. So anyway, I definitely agree, though, that it was a very strong season. And even though, to me, it feels like it hit a bump right there at the end for me, that's certainly not enough to change the overall assessment that it was a really great season with some really strong players and some really likable people. I think that was one of the things that really felt great about these last several episodes was just the fact that, I think pretty much after Jason went out, I liked everybody still in the game. And it was weird to be going to the end with such a positive feeling among everybody remaining in the game.
Yep.
We didn't have any of those people left who really disliked each other in any way. And that was kind of refreshing.
Yes,
it
was.
Even when they were all people who had enough like trust and enough of a connection that even when they were playing the game against one another, it wasn't taken as like personal attacks. And I'm thinking in particular of Ty and Aubrey forcing the Ty to try to take Sydney out, and then Sydney losing that challenge. It's like she's obviously emotional. She's very disappointed to be out of the game, but there's no anger.
No.
There's no bitterness. There's no feeling of like, how could you do this to me? It was all just like, nope, this is the game. And I like these people and we're playing and I'm disappointed that I lost, but it's not because I don't like them or because they don't like me. That's just how the game works.
Yep.
So in any case, let's go ahead and rewind all the way back to rooster crowing, Mark the chicken crowing before dawn, waking everybody up, and Ty definitely rightly anxious about that, just because they've kept Mark around really at his insistence, and so the more that he annoys everybody and disrupts their sleep, that's got to be bad for Ty. Although at this point, it definitely feels like if they have not eaten Mark after all this time, I don't think they're going to eat him now. You know what I mean? It's like at a certain point, once you've made the decision to not eat him because he's a pet, it's harder to unmake that decision.
Yes.
Just the same, that does not mean that it wouldn't result in people laying there awake, wanting to be asleep, going, stupid Ty and his stupid chicken. So it is kind of fascinating, though, and obviously this came up even more later, just the idea that it is kind of new to the game of Survivor, the idea that someone would successfully have talked starving people out of eating the chicken that's right there for that purpose. But,
Yeah. But like you said, once they had made the decision, it's really hard to unmake it. Mm-hmm.
I was definitely amused at the reveal during the reunion show that Mark was, in fact, named for Mark Burnett, the creator of Survivor. So in any case, we start this episode with 4 people, which, again, as we kind of talked about, was not how it usually works in a finale, leading us to be very suspicious that it was maybe going to be a final 2.
Yes.
But certainly when we're at 4, it's kind of a natural 2 versus 2 tie, and got some semantic confusion upcoming since Ty and Ty sound the same. But Ty is pretty confident that Aubrey and he are tight, and so they're going to stick together. But it also seems likely that Sydney and Michelle are going to do the same thing, and so they're faced with 2 versus 2. How are they going to navigate that? Because no one wants there to be a tie if there's a way to avoid the tie, and still keep the people that they want, obviously. Because as he discusses later, Ty could have decided to vote with Sydney and Michelle, and that would avoid the uncertainty of the tiebreaker challenge. But as we've seen in previous seasons, I think lots of times there's an appeal to the tiebreaker challenge just because if you're feeling conflicted about it, it gives them a chance. You know what I mean? It's like it takes some of the sting out of your decision because you're not directly eliminating anyone. with that one. It's like either you're choosing someone definitely to go, or you're putting two people in a chance where one of them will go, and it's up to them who. That's an easier decision, and I think a lot of people make it when in that situation.
Right.
Although I think sometimes it's more distinct a situation where the person who would go, if not for the tiebreaker challenge, is more aware that that's exactly what's going to happen, and they are powerfully lobbying, like, at least give me the chance, at least give me the chance. Whereas it seemed more like a combined decision for Aubrey and Ty to just say, nope, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do, as opposed to having to ask. And that's just the benefit of her having formed such a close relationship with him.
And Ty being the kind of person that would appeal to very easily.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we have Sydney and Michelle talking about what's best for them. And it's definitely the case where no matter what the alliances were before, when you get down to 4 people, it really can't help but be more of an individual game. Like, you might still have your relationship with others, but it's at that point in the game where no one can really hold it against you if you make a decision against a supposed ally. Like, as much as Aubrey would have been disappointed to go, I don't think she would have held it against Ty in like a personal sense.
No.
And so in any case, they go to a reward challenge where the reward will be a meal designed for healthy refueling, as opposed to, here, eat a whole bunch of steak.
Yeah, get yourself sick and take them off.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of notes about the challenge itself, other than just observing the...
It seemed very difficult.
Yeah. Well, and then just noting the whole thing where Aubrey was so far ahead, but then kind of lost her lead because of the one mismatch she had in her tiles that led to her trying wrong numbers more than once before anyone else even got that far.
But she was so far ahead, she was able to weather that, and then still, although I guess technically had someone else picked the right combination right out the gate, because other people were actually doing numbers by the time that she got hers correctly. So
yeah, both Ty and Sydney both had time to try a combination before Aubrey actually won. So she really did use up her whole lead, but had the benefit of having been working on the puzzle for longer. So she still had a lead in that sense, even if she was at the same stage. Yeah. But, it did get to the point where it really could have gone to anybody at that point. So in any case, as is often the case with these types of rewards, there's the possibility of bringing someone else. But I thought it was interesting that with only 4 people left, she was also given the option to not choose another person.
Yes.
What did you think of her choice of Sydney?
I mean, she gave her... The reasoning that she gave made sense. Well, here's how I thought of it. I thought it sounded really good when she gave the reasoning behind it, until I saw Michelle and Ty bonding on, on the beach, and was like, oh, this looks like it might backfire. It never ended up doing that, because Ty was never gonna, he was gonna be a lot of talk. With the, this is an individual game now, so now I have Michelle as an option. Michelle was never an option for him.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we see by the end, is that he liked to think that he had another option, but he was always going to do whatever Aubrey wanted. And that was always going to be the case. But we didn't know that at the time. So it was kind of an interesting chain of emotions that I went through, and I was like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then watching Michelle and being like, well, no, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, because now Michelle's found a way to work herself out of, because at that point we thought Michelle was in trouble, and so we see her working her way out, and it's like, oh, this might have backfired on you.
Yeah, because I think Sydney, as much as she liked having both options available, was absolutely willing to vote Michelle out if Michelle was an option on the table.
Oh yeah.
So it's that's where that's definitely one of the things that we really have to applaud Michelle for. I mean, in terms of the many things that she did right, winning a crucial immunity challenge when you absolutely have to that's an important part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I think what Michelle sees, and for all her. Are we still live? Okay, I briefly got a call dropped, but now it still says live, so I'm hoping that we're still. Yeah, so I hope that this is still going to be preserved as per usual. If not, I'm not sure what to do about it. In any case, I think, so Michelle says a little bit like, oh, she thinks that Aubrey made the wrong decision for who to pick. And I'm thinking, did she though? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, what is the rationale for picking anybody else?
Yeah, because she doesn't need to pick Ty, because he's going to do whatever she wants. Mm-hmm. She isn't going to pick Michelle because she doesn't want Michelle to get strength and healing in order to win the immunity. So, yeah, I mean, it made sense. I thought it made a ton of sense. I mean, the only reason Michelle said she picked the wrong person is because Michelle was using that in her own mind as a way to say, like, I need to take advantage of this situation and try to get Ty, who hasn't spoken to me since we were on the Beauty Tribe together, I need to try to open up to him. And that's where it was like, the wrong decision, because Ty did open up to her. Well, ultimately, he never was going to go with her, so it wasn't the wrong decision. That was more of like Michelle's self-motivational talk. Mm-hmm. Well,
it's kind of her stomach talking of like, but I wanted to go. Unless what she thought was that, like, what you could make the argument that Sydney is more like she's going to do what she's going to do, whether you pick her or not, versus Ty might be more susceptible to being swayed. Maybe that's what she might have been thinking, even though I think I agree with you that he wasn't going to be so. And I think Sydney was always going to do the wait and see who she had to choose from and then decide then. So I tend to think it was exactly the right decision.
Yeah.
Even if, ultimately their preferred choice took themselves off the table by winning immunity. So in any case, Sydney at the meal seems to be, she's saying it's strengthening her bond with Aubrey. And they're talking, and she's talking about her choices, whether to try to get out Michelle or Ty. And she says that even to the camera at that point, which is interesting just because it goes to show that not everybody is looking at the breakdown in the same way. You know what I mean? Michelle is definitely thinking that Aubrey is a big threat. But it seems like Sydney is not seeing Aubrey that way, or at least maybe whatever connection they have, because they've been working together for a while, was just enough that she was willing to have that be more powerful than the worry that Aubrey might win. Maybe she's just that confident that she could win against anybody she was up against.
Yeah.
I could see that. Honestly, if I had predicted that anyone would have beat Aubrey, I would have guessed Sydney before Michelle. But yeah, I think any of them could have been argued as the winner. Ty would have been a different sort of choice, meaning I think voting for him as the winner would have been a strange way to reward basically likability over any other factor. But so I would have been really surprised there, but I think a solid case could be made for any of the other three.
Oh yeah, once it got down to that final, well, I would say 5, but even 6, like even when Jason was there, it really, you knew, now that I look, especially looking back on it, maybe we couldn't have predicted it coming in, but in hindsight, it seems so obvious that it was going to be either Sydney, Aubrey, or Michelle, that none of the rest of those guys stood a chance.
Yeah.
None of the guys stood a chance.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, so I agree. It, the only guys remaining in the game at that point were either likable but hadn't done anything, or unlikable.
Yep.
So, but yeah.
Or likable and had done a lot of things completely erratically, which is
yeah. There you go. Yeah. So in any case, though, later, while Aubrey and Sydney are at the reward, that's when, as we kind of talked about, Michelle is approaching Ty, saying, "Well, if we think it's going to be either you or me, then why don't we team up and make it not be either of us?" And again, I think ultimately it was the right thing to try, even if it didn't seem likely to work. And thankfully for Michelle, she won immunity, so it was moot. So let's see. That's when we go to the immunity challenge. And this is another one where, at least for the first little bit, it seemed like Aubrey was way ahead. But then for whatever reason, this puzzle, unlike some of the other puzzles she's done really well at, she just really couldn't seem to figure this one out, the different levels, because she was the first to start it. Yeah, she was the first to start it, but then Ty and Michelle both basically passed her, even though she started first. And she really didn't make a whole lot of progress, whereas the two of them were kind of really pretty solid. And then Michelle just blew past everybody by the end.
Yeah. So the reward challenge looked harder because of the earlier part, like that machete balancing thing.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, Aubrey really got and just blew past everybody and got into the far lead. That looked ridiculously difficult to me.
Yeah.
As an armchair survivor. On this one, getting all the pieces and all that kind of stuff was, it's not easy, but that was relatively normal. But for whatever it was, like the way that this puzzle worked, it was really tricky when you're super tired.
Yeah.
And how they had like they weren't really different colors, but there was like different shades on them to show that they belonged on different levels. And you had to get them all the same height. I don't know. It clearly was tricky. I'm sure it's a tricky puzzle when you're not exhausted, but exhausted, that's had to be hard. So
yeah, no question. It looked hard. It just really looked like, you look at it and you can't help but wonder, at least on the face of it, it's like, is there any trick to it, or is it really just keep trying endless combinations until you get them right?
It felt like, now this is just how it seemed at the end, that there was some sort of trick to it. That well, maybe they weren't all exact. There was sort of a, there was a 3/4 one and a 1/4 one, and then there's a half and then 2 1/4s.
Mm-hmm.
And though they were all different heights, I think, so they weren't all the same size, but that's what it felt like is where Michelle really got that scheme, is that she started to figure out that there was some combination on each one that, and if you could make that visual judgment of, oh, this is part of that one that has these 2 types of pieces, and this is part of that one that has these 4 types of pieces. It seemed like that started to click with her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she was able to just start kind of boom, 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 like, okay, I need this, a 1/4 piece, I need a half piece, and so I don't know that was the way that it worked, but it seemed like there was a pattern that, though not identical through all the levels, was similar enough that if it triggered in you, you could figure it out. And that's what Michelle did, which is why her last 2 levels, she just it was like stacking Legos, basically.
Yeah. If it is as you describe, which seems plausible to me, it might even be that overthinking it could really be a hindrance. You know what I mean? Like if your assumption really is that it can only go together one way rather than just being specific but varying combinations.
Yeah. Well, and Aubrey, it looked like never even really unlocked the first one.
Yeah. Something about,
at some point got that, but it never clicked with her, like how to make this thing work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in any case, Michelle manages to just dominate that puzzle, win the immunity when she really needed it. Good for her. And ends up safely going into this last situation. And so she gets to have some say, at least, in who she would like to have go, except that since she's decided on Aubrey, and Aubrey and Ty are close, that's going to be more difficult. But she's in a good spot in the sense that almost whoever goes is as long as it's not her, she's getting to try to sway who she's going to be up against at the end rather than having to fight for her own
life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in any case, she's thinking, let's try to get out Aubrey. Sydney is on board with that. And so they think that they have persuaded Ty. And I mean, even in the final, Michelle admits that she thought, I guess she believed him when he said that he was willing. Maybe just because her assumption was nobody wants the tie where it's uncertain if they don't have to. Maybe she was more willing to assume that everybody saw Aubrey as a threat the way she did. Whereas Ty is really kind of not functioning in the game on that level.
No.
Like even in the finals, it seems like he was really only trying to say that he was better than Michelle. He really didn't even ever try to make the case that he was better than Aubrey.
No.
Although it's also possible there that he was reading the room better than I was at least able to from home, in the sense of sensing that that's the way the jury was going and that that's who he had to pull votes from. That's possible too.
That is true.
In any case, Aubrey is back to paranoia, which we know was not necessarily merited here, but certainly I don't think is inappropriate for the situation she's in. Certainly wanting to be sure that Ty is really with her, and especially since she can acknowledge that even though she's had a lot of luck persuading him to do what she wants, he's also behaved very erratically in the past. So could it be possible that they would bend his ear and convince him? And of course, the idea is in her confessional, the implication is, might he turn on her, and if that's possible, should she try to turn on him first? But I suspect that's all kind of a red herring, because I don't think Sydney and Michelle would be willing to entertain that idea. You know what I mean? Like, even if Aubrey went to Sydney and Michelle to say, hey, let's the three of us vote out Ty instead, I don't think they would agree. So so Aubrey was kind of in the tough spot of just having to hope that Ty really was going to stick with her, which of course he did.
Yep.
But she really didn't have any other option other than to prepare for a fire making challenge, which she apparently had done and Sydney had not. So,
which, again, how do you not? Especially when Sydney even was like, "Hey, should I go try to learn to make fire or go practice making fire?" You know, Michelle's like, "I mean, you could. I don't think you need to, but you could."
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it's also, I would go practice.
It's the sort of thing that we've said this has been a recurring theme, not just for the last few seasons, but for years now, is that people should know how to make freaking fire with flint on day one. And if they don't, then learn it. Start learning it on day one. Yes. For anyone to get towards the end of the game still not having ever done it is really, that's on you at that point.
Yeah, you ought to be able to get like a basic fire going with flint before you even go on. Yeah. As far as like, there's a little bit more involved in this, and that you need to build a flame quickly under pressure.
Yeah.
Like that requires a little different practice. Mm-hmm. But even if you don't know how to do that coming in, like, you should be learning and practicing. And especially if you come into this last one and it's like, oh, there could be a tie. Maybe I ought to go practice this.
Yeah.
Because clearly Aubrey knew how to do it so well that her fire was built incorrectly, burned out, and with no new materials, she was able to restart it and get it up to where it burned through.
Yeah.
I'd never seen that. Like, she ran out of materials.
Hmm.
And so if Sydney could have just paced herself and just built it, but she literally didn't know how to build it at all.
Yeah. Well, as we heard, when they come back from the tribal council, it sounds as though it really wasn't ever in any doubt, because Sydney had never successfully made fire with flint. So it seems like, in a lot of respects, it's one thing to say the fire making challenge is fair, and it is fair in the sense that they both had equal opportunity to learn how to make fire before that point. But in terms of having equivalent skills and it being a fair matchup, it was really lopsided in that respect, because Aubrey had done the smart thing and learned how to make fire prior to that point.
Yes.
And I don't want to beat up Sydney too much here, because I like her generally, but this is just one of those times.
But
keeps happening.
Aubrey used all of her materials, built a fire that didn't aim correctly at the string and fizzled out, and was able to resurrect that fire from embers to a point where it could then still burn down the string before you could even get anything going. Like,
yeah,
that's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's just like, no one has any excuse for not knowing that this might come up at this point.
Yeah.
It's been, this is season 32 of this show, and the ability to make fire has proven crucial on many occasions, not to mention it just being a useful skill at camp regardless. it just seems so dumb that, like, even if you haven't learned how to do it going in, learn it when you go in. Like, you know, how often are you just sitting around camp and just say, hey, can someone help me learn how to do this so I can know and I could help with the fire at some point in the future, maybe? And also maybe know how to do it at a fire making challenge in the future if such a thing might come up.
If that might happen.
Yeah. So in any case, they have the fire making challenge. Let's see. Well, so I guess we have the tribal council before the Ty vote. Ty talks about it really only being a choice between Aubrey and Sydney because he's not going to vote for himself and Michelle is immune. So it's really just those are the two choices. And he talks about it's an individual game now because that's what you're supposed to say in this situation. Aubrey, this didn't really seem as important to me at the time, but now I wonder where she talks about, she makes kind of an odd passive aggressive sort of threat about like whoever goes to the jury would take privileged information with them and might be able to sway the jury one way or the other. And I'm like, what? Who is she talking to there? Is she, because presumably who she's talking to is trying to convince Ty to stay with her. But it's like a weird argument to make. And I can't help but wonder if that would be, because I can't help but think that if I'm on the jury, that's kind of an off-putting thing for her to say. It didn't really raise a flag for me quite that way when she said it, but just thinking back on it, I don't know if it would have made the difference for anybody, but it's also, it's a weird thing to say and also a little bit arrogant to imply that somehow she has this secret knowledge that would change everybody's mind.
What, on the jury?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if she had that, then she would have won the game because she would have done it at tribal council.
Mm. Yeah. Anyway, I think she's also she's saying a lot of stuff.
Right. She's trying to make Ty feel okay with his decision.
Yeah. And also just make it not as obvious a thing of like if she's perceiving that it's possible she's seen as a threat, she wants to try to equivocate on that, but without really. What we've seen in some past seasons at this point is people really oddly sitting in the tribal council and downplaying their own game, which undercuts their ability to sell everybody on their game at the final, right?
Yes.
Whereas I thought she did better, at least in the sense of saying things like, well, certain traits might be strengths or weaknesses depending on who you ask and how they feel about those things. And I think that's true, and it kind of goes in that same direction of trying to have it both ways a little bit, but without necessarily saying, what are you talking about? People won't want to vote for me. I've been emotional and didn't make good decisions or something. And then later having to turn around and deny that. In any case, though, I was thinking it looked bad for Aubrey at this point before the voting, just on the basis of she seemed really concerned about it. So it, which is, I guess, understandable, but I assumed she was reading energy that I guess wasn't really there, because Ty did, in fact, vote with her, producing the tie. And they don't bother revoting because it would have been the same result. And that's where we had the fire making challenge. So, but when Sydney goes out, I'm sure that, like, obviously part of her emotion is disappointment at just being out, but I can't help but imagine too that part of it is, to go out like that in kind of this embarrassing way because of just really not making any fire at all and having it not even be a little bit close. That's probably just puts some extra lemon juice on the cut, so to speak.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's,
Aubrey built a fire incorrectly.
Yeah.
It burned down. She had no more materials and managed to resurrect the fire and win before Sydney could even get an ember going. Like, yes, that's going to sting a little bit.
But, it's at the same time, the two of them hug each other right afterwards and saying, it's all love. And I thought that was great. And that's a part of what I was talking about that I really liked towards the end of this season is how much just positive energy there was, even when people were disappointed. And so we have Sydney talk about, she wanted to change her mom's life, change her own life. And she's very emotional about it, but it was all still kind of like, it was sad, but not angry. And I thought that it makes a difference and kind of made me feel better about everybody.
Yep.
This is where we got a live interlude where Probst brought Sydney's mom on stage and interviewed her briefly. And that was kind of fun. Sometimes those live interludes seem kind of pointless, but this one was kind of nice. To have Sydney's mom talk about when she had the heat stroke earlier in the season, talking about how apparently the bodybuilding runs in the family. Probst says, well, maybe if that last challenge had been a bench press instead.
She would have, yes. If that had been the case, she would have.
So in any case, that's when we're heading back to camp, and that's where they talk about how I guess Sydney had really never made fire with Flint before, and Ty seems very interested in finding out whether or not Michelle and Sydney believed him when he said he was going to vote with them. He seemed kind of preoccupied with that even into the final, given that it doesn't really affect anything one way or the other at this point. Maybe he was just wanting to try to gauge whether he could call that a move or not.
Yeah, I guess. He was so all over the place for the last... ever since he sort of left the Jason and Scott alliance that he didn't even really want to be in, he's just been super erratic.
Yeah, well, I suspect that he would have been erratic before then, except that before that he just had these dominant personalities kind of running the show.
Yeah.
But so in any case, Michelle is still very worried about Aubrey. It says to Ty that, you just handed Aubrey $1 million. Turns out, not so much. No. But certainly Michelle was, it's certainly worth noting that Michelle certainly feels that Aubrey is her competition and not Ty. So.
But also prepares her argument for, defeating Aubrey, not defeating Ty, and I think she did a good job.
See, because it's a hard thing to lay on Ty at that point, just because even if he had gone with them and voted out Aubrey, that just would have made Sydney be there, and Sydney's got a strong game too. So it's really not a slam dunk either way, honestly.
Yes.
So, but even just in that night before, it's Ty pointing out when they're all wanting to try to hug it out and be final three, and Ty is saying, but Jeff didn't say, and now it's up to the jury. Are we sure that there's not another challenge? And this is the point where, watching at home, we're going, uh-oh, what do you think there is? And sure enough, there is, but weird. So what do you think of this twist with the winning the ability to eliminate a jury member?
I think just for whatever reason, they probably had this thought up earlier. I was like, did they just run into a timing where it was going to end up being a final two and just be like, well, we don't want a final two, so we need something else for them to do for an hour. Mm-hmm. I thought it was fine.
Mm-hmm. I read a Q&A with...
It wasn't like, this is the coolest twist ever, or I can't stand this. It was fine. It was something, they're trying something new. It seemed to work.
The Q&A with Probst says that this is something they've considered for like years, for like 7 years or something. They've had this idea, but never tried it out, and they tried it out this time, and he thought that it was a good time to do it. I tend to agree that if you're going to do it, this seems like a good season for it. But at the same time, I suspect that it also might have been a little bit like what you said, that the decision to do it might have been a little bit more on the fly than they let on.
Yeah. It worked out fine, though.
Yeah.
Because it introduced this whole... I don't know, it was an interesting sort of 15 minutes when they were debating it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it's like they're still working each other, but it doesn't have quite the same like panic, because it doesn't really matter that much. Mm-hmm. So to watch them kind of argue and debate and like, oh, this person could do this, and to see them build up like the influence that certain people could have, and like the drama that they attributed to this thing.
Yeah, it did do some nice reminding us of who is on the jury and what they might do.
Well, and also the psychoanalytics of this game is that like you're just so geared up to make every choice so dramatic, like, yeah, I'm sure, like, if you remove Neil at this point, he will no longer convince everyone,
Yeah.
Like they tried to make it more than just removing one vote, it wasn't like a -1. They wanted to make it seem like it was, oh, this person could have all this influence, and it was just funny to watch, because it's like, they definitely, like, that's just how everything is worked up in their minds at this point.
Yeah. I was inclined to dismiss the influence argument, too, a little bit more, partly just because I don't feel like they explained it very clearly in the show. But the idea that the person who is eliminated doesn't even get to talk at the tribal council, and they'll be sequestered from the rest of the jury, like from that point forward. So to be sure, whatever talking they might have been inclined to do to the other jury members, they've probably already done it. So everybody probably knows approximately how everyone's feeling, at least at that point. But they're removing their ability to ask a softball question, or on the contrary, asking a tough question of someone else that might cause someone to flounder. Like, that's significant, although I agree, too, that they still probably oversold that a little bit. I thought it was fine, too, but I'm not sure I like it as an ongoing thing, just because it's not that there's anything unfair about it, but I just feel like it really disrupts kind of the concept of what the jury is. You know what I mean? Like the idea that that you can eliminate someone even after they've been eliminated, and then they like making the jury and then, but they sort of retroactively didn't make the jury.
Yeah. Right.
And like, so that
part of it, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought it was fine. And it seemed like Neil was kind of, the sting of that was mitigated somewhat just by being the first person for this to happen to and kind of being notable for that reason. But it just feels more like part of your strategy all the way along through the game is that you're trying to manage the jury, right, and have made relationships with people, and the idea that that gets taken away by something that is as, you know, just becomes dependent on who wins that one challenge. I'm a little wishy-washy about it. Like, I didn't hate it here, but I don't think I want it to become a regular thing. But yeah. So in any case, we go to the new challenge, and there's this weird fake out with, you know, today immunity is not up for grabs, and everybody on screen and at home is saying, what? So what's happening there? But of course, this is where they explain it. And I also kind of liked that the challenge itself was the option that nobody chose from a previous challenge.
Yeah.
Which kind of doubly suggests that maybe this was an on-the-fly decision.
Because they didn't have an actual challenge for it.
Yeah. But what it also made me wonder...
They'd already done.
Yeah. What it made me wonder, though, is given that the challenge they're talking about was a time where, as individuals, they could decide whether to do the puzzle or the dexterity. And it's really coincidence that they all chose the puzzle at that time, right? So what would have happened if it had been a mix? You know what I mean? Like, of these three that are left, if one of them had chosen the puzzle originally and the other two chose the dexterity, would they all three this time have to do the opposite one?
Well, if they decided on the fly, then they never had to think about that.
No. That's true. They could have just said, what should we do? Should we try to... We could repeat something we've already done, or can we quick build something that's been on a previous season?
That's where it's like, oh wait, hey, we had this thing that nobody did.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. So I would not be surprised at all if it was an on-the-fly decision. There seems to be evidence to support that.
Yes.
And it's true that the fact that there were 3 medical evacuations, it didn't necessarily change the timing too much, though, because I'm trying to remember the 3 times that someone was evacuated, and I think at least once they did still go and have the tribal council, didn't they? Because they didn't with Joe, and I don't think they did with Neil either, but what about Caleb back when he was eliminated? I'm trying to remember if they still had the tribal council or not. And see, now I have to go and look it up. Let's see. I'm having to do search on my... Okay. So it was episode 4 where he was eliminated, and he did. They did then proceed to have tribal council, where Alicia was voted out. So that just goes to show that the 3, probably they didn't have tribal council after the evacuation for the remaining 2 because they already knew that they were going to be short with numbers. Yeah. So in any case, let's see. I'm scrolling back on my notes. So Um, so Michelle wins the dexterity challenge.
Yes.
This does seem another one like it could have gone to anybody because they all at some point dropped their whole tower and had to start over. But so in any case, Michelle wins, and it was interesting, I agree, that rather than just keep her own counsel on this decision, she actively solicited the opinions of both Ty and Aubrey, knowing that each of them is going to be really trying to make decisions based on their own interest rather than necessarily trying to think what's going to be the best for Michelle.
Yes. That's fun.
Yeah, I was glad that she did that.
Overplayed this, you know, it was like super game theory on something that really didn't matter that much, but it felt like they made it feel like it did for 15 minutes, you know?
Yeah. Now, it was kind of amusing, though, the idea, like, not that I think Aubrey should have done something different, but the idea that Michelle would have any interest at all in eliminating Scott. I just, you know, because Michelle is fully aware that Aubrey is her competition for votes, not Ty. And so eliminating someone who is, you know, of anyone, maybe the most likely to vote for Ty, and even then he didn't. That's just, why would she do that? It's not that I think that Aubrey should have said anything different, but I just don't think that there was really any chance that Michelle was even really considering that.
Right.
I think she mostly wanted to... Sorry, go ahead.
I found this 15 minutes just sort of amusing because it's exactly that. Like, of course Aubrey's going to say that, but does that really matter to Michelle? Like, because she knows why Aubrey's saying it. Like, I know that you know that Scott would maybe vote for Ty, but maybe vote for me. But I also know that Scott Ty is not my competition. You know,
yeah.
Like, there's just all this whole thing on a thing that, like I said, ultimately isn't really that critical. Like, Neil was not going to like sway all these people. You know.
Well, I think.
You know?
But I think just when the question is just both Neil and Joe seem for sure to vote for Aubrey. So between those two. Yeah, okay. I think between those two, yeah, maybe Neil would be more persuasive than Joe. It's not that it's not that he's necessarily going to be that persuasive. It's just a question of you have to pick one of those two. So what's your decision?
Correct. Yeah, she made the right choice. It's just it was amusing that they made it seem so much more important, and that they had to get counsel on this. Like, no, okay, those two are voting for Aubrey. That's your competition. Pick the more persuasive of the two, and that's it. Like, that's the end of the discussion. But they made it into, like, because they're so primed to, like, have these conversations, like, they made it feel like it was so much more valuable and interesting than it actually was.
Well, so here's a question. What effect do you think that her decision had on the remaining jury members? Do you think that there is an element where they're inclined to look on her as even more positive than they might have previously because she could have eliminated them and didn't? Do you think that have influenced anybody's decision, or do you think that they probably had their mind made up already?
That's a good question. I couldn't even speculate that. Because so much of her game was based on sort of having that positive alignment with people, I wouldn't want to say that this didn't help it. I don't know that it took anybody who was like, I am for sure voting against Michelle. Oh, but she didn't choose me, so I will go with Michelle. But as far as the subtle part of it that you're talking about, like, they feel an affinity towards her argument. They kind of like it. And then this happens, and it seems like, again, it's the final win. And she chose smartly, and it wasn't me because, like, she believes that I'll listen to her objectively. And, yeah, maybe it does. You're right. Maybe there's a little bit of.
And I'm not trying to imply that that's not a legit thing by suggesting, just because. So what I'm saying essentially is that I think she's maybe helped by this twist even more than the simple ability to remove a vote from Aubrey. Because there's probably an element, the jury's coming in and they hear one of us might get eliminated. Oh no, like I hope it's not me. What might happen? I don't know. This is unprecedented.
Yeah.
And then, she picks someone other than them, and there's an element of, whew, it wasn't me. I'm glad she didn't pick me. I have gratitude now to her for not picking me. And I can't help but
in the way that she framed it is basically, I've picked someone who is not going to be objective, which means by default, those that weren't picked, she deems objective jury members. And so people are like, oh, she doesn't see me as like in her corner, or she sees me as objective. I'm going to make the right decision for Survivor. And there's kind of there's a positive aura that's felt with like someone who's like, you are objective. I trust you to make the right decision. And weird that the right decision might be to you.
Yeah, and so if there was someone who's maybe on the balance, not sure, this is one last challenge win, which is a plus. And then that element of you made a smart decision, and then also just the subconscious emotional of, whew, she trusts me.
Well,
she didn't
and there's
eliminate
also
me.
a little bit more, because I think Scott and Jason were a little bit different in that they weren't worried about, they were like almost demanding, like, well, we're troublemakers, so they're gonna have to vote us out because we are just wild cards, And Jason was even saying that. He's like, it's gonna be me because you don't know what I'm gonna say. And then for Michelle to be like, yeah, she didn't say this directly, but it's basically like, Jason, I trust you to say whatever you want because that's how this should play out. And it's all of a sudden there's this little like, oh, well, yeah, I like that she wants me to be able to speak my mind. I like that, so I'm not angry with her. But anyway, I think it was a great call.
Yeah, it was absolutely the right decision to make. And then part of what I've been doing as we go through this is looking for the clues that I, didn't appreciate on the way through, but make sense of everybody's decision at the end. And so, for example, I think she absolutely made the right call. But then Neil, on his way out, my first interpretation of the way he responded there was that he was probably right that everybody in the jury was not impressed with her and that she didn't stand a chance. Because what he said, and I got the quote here, is, you came to this game thinking you were a badass bitch, but you're more like a cute little puppy still suckling at the teat, and I don't think you stand a chance. Which, first of all, was kind of surprisingly mean-spirited from Neil, when I wouldn't have guessed that from him, predicted that from him. It's kind of a mean thing to say. I mean, even if you think they don't stand a chance, and even if you're mad because you just got eliminated, especially since he didn't really act mad later when he was sort of saying his final words. But I can't help but wonder, not that it would have been his intention, But by going out as an Aubrey supporter, saying something mean to Michelle, that would even be another thing that might bump people more in the direction of Michelle if they were kind of in the middle before. Is like, that's not right. I kind of think Michelle played a good game. I'm inclined to defend her now because she's been attacked in a way that I think is unfair.
True.
So, and I'm just looking for, what are the missing pieces that I didn't grasp on the first viewing that led to me being so surprised at how everybody voted. So, because I definitely think it is an unfair attack. Like, I think her game, didn't merit that level of vitriol.
Oh.
And it just seemed like it came out of nowhere. I mean, we could understand if he, was mad at being eliminated. But again, when we saw him talk just minutes later, he really didn't seem that mad. So he was kind of even giving her props for having picked the right person because he would have voted for Aubrey. So, but so in any case, we get another live interlude where Probst promises there will be an unexpected guest at the final tribal council, which I guess turns out to be Mark the Chicken, which, okay. I mean, I think I felt like it's an overstatement to say that's an unexpected guest, but sure, why not?
There's a lot of over-dramatizing of this.
Yeah.
I mean, whole episode.
Yeah. But so in any way,
it didn't bother me, but it existed.
Yeah, but coming out of that sort of pseudo tribal council, I think Michelle was a little bit shaken by how mean Neil was on his way out, and she was kind of concerned that meant that the final tribal council was also going to be similarly mean in a way that it really turned out not to be at all. But in any case, though, Aubrey was, has to give Michelle credit for yep, that's exactly who she should have picked. I'm a little bummed, but there's nothing else to it, just to try to fight for every vote she can get. And then they do the standard end of season stuff. They get to go do mirror and a scale and the final three feast and all of that. But all of that's really just used as kind of something to show on screen while we get everybody kind of making what their plan is for the final tribal council. And even at that point, Ty is reduced to just kind of spouting jargon buzzwords about making it to the end without really seeming to have anything specific to his own game to say. Which, it's like, that's just kind of the kind of player he was. It's like, he is a really nice guy, and I think Probst was onto something later in the finale when he talks about Ty has kind of created a new player archetype. Nobody has ever really played the game like he did before. And I think that's really interesting, but it also is just a hard sell at a tribal council.
Right.
So in any case, and I'm in particular thinking going into the final that his biggest hurdle when trying to play up his strategy is that the only really big move he ever made is the one that he feels the saddest about. So,
yeah. We knew he had no shot when it got to this point.
Yeah.
He didn't do a very good job. can't articulate what he did because there's nothing to do. It's not even about him not being a good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have good choices, you know.
Yeah.
He just kind of did what he felt like. And yeah, to Prope's point, yeah, we haven't had anybody who played so erratically
Mm-hmm.
and yet made it so far and was still liked while not going to be rewarded with winning the game. Everybody liked him.
Mm-hmm.
Like other erratic players, people are like, no,
Yeah.
don't want anything to do with that.
Mm-hmm. And even like his one big strategic move when he's there in the finals with Aubrey, he can say, well, my big move was that I've turned on Scott and voted out Scott. And then Aubrey can say, yes, and I talked you into doing that. So your move is really my move.
Yep.
So it's like, but in any case, we get to the final. There's no opening statements, or at least we didn't see them if there were some. And then Nick comes up and does whatever that was. Dalton Ross called it his Probst replacement audition, where he's basically trying to do generic describing what the situation is rather than actually contributing. I mean, he predicts that everybody's going to have a lot of animosity, which they don't really seem to, or at least not compared to previous final tribal councils we've seen. So you might not get questions from everybody, so try to make the most of what questions you get. And he's saying, Michelle, display intelligence, implying that that's going to be where people attack her. Ty, display awareness, which is probably good advice, but it's not that. It's good advice that Ty is probably not able to take because he really didn't have the awareness that he would need to display at this point. And then Aubrey, display confidence, which I think is probably actually good advice because that was always kind of her Achilles heel, I think. And then he says he thinks that all the votes are still up in the air for the most part. Do you think that's true?
No.
They always say that, but...
Yeah, of course they say that because it's not interesting otherwise, but there's no way that... Well, maybe. I mean, maybe. And we just didn't see... Maybe tribal council was like way longer and like all this other stuff happened. They just try to give us the highlights.
Yeah.
But from what we saw, that doesn't persuade a 5-2 vote. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
especially the kinds of questions, like again, we don't know if you see somebody come up and ask questions of one person but not the other two, whether their other two questions were just so uninteresting that they didn't make TV, or if they didn't exist. Like it's hard to say.
So just for everybody's reference, Nick was one of the 2 votes that Aubrey got.
Part of why I think he said everything's up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wanted to believe that it was when it wasn't.
Yeah. He saw people leaning towards Michelle and wanted to try to suggest that there was more possibility people would change their mind.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you might be right. So Debbie comes up next and says she's proud of everybody, but calls Ty on his indecisiveness. He has a better answer than I would have predicted, which is not to say necessarily. I mean, I think it's the best possible answer he can give to support the indecisive way he played, which is to say that it wasn't about flitting back and forth between 2 different strategies. It was that he had alliances with people on both sides of this and just had to choose. And once he chose, he followed through with that, which I'm not 100% sure that's true. But in terms of an answer to the question in this context, I thought it was reasonably good.
Yeah, it was close.
Yeah. And then Debbie says, to Aubrey, you metamorphosis from neurotic nerd to geek warrior. And then Aubrey had what I thought was a pretty good answer about saying that, on a personal level, having to vote you out was my biggest regret in the game, but I had felt like it's what I had to do at that stage. And so given how that played out, I was surprised when Debbie also voted for Michelle. That's one of the ones that I'm a little bit, but she didn't even ask Michelle anything as far as we could tell.
Right. That's what makes it always so complicated is we don't
know if there was more that we didn't see.
Right.
So then Julio is next, and has an interesting approach to it. Basically, she is one of the people who's really pointing out that Michelle was one of the weakest links in the game for the first half of the season. She got really lucky, and then it was only when she finally voted out Julia that's like, okay, well, so that was a move that impressed me. That basically gives her the opportunity to make the case of having changed it up and playing much stronger since then, which I think is true, but it also just strikes me as also spending a lot of time on the idea that the first half of her game was pretty weak. Because it's one thing to say she didn't make moves that she didn't have to make and implying that the passivity was deliberate, but I'm not really sure that's true. You know what I mean? It's a way to spin it, but I got more of the feeling that she really kind of wasn't doing anything because she didn't know what to do. And then she did find her footing and she did play well, but it's an interesting question, I guess. Someone plays weak for the first half but manages to stick around and then plays really strong and finishes strong. Is that more important than playing reasonably well the whole way through? I don't know. Not for everybody else, I guess.
It was. Yeah. Sometimes it is.
Mm-hmm.
All about how you finish. Doesn't matter how you start.
Well, there's an element to that where it could be about expectations. You know what I mean? It's like, it's one thing if Aubrey seems like she was kind of sort of in control for a big part of the game, whereas Michelle seemed like she kind of came out of nowhere towards the end and played really strong. And that sort of that surprise of like, wow, I didn't know you had it in you. And that sort of thing, as opposed to someone like Aubrey was like, well, we kind of knew you were going to be one of the people to beat. But Michelle, wow, I wouldn't have guessed.
Yep.
Julia also does say to Ty that basically saying that he started out really strong until the merge when he went crazy, which it's like, I'm not sure how strong he was before the merge, other than just being so likable that nobody wanted to vote him out. I mean, I don't know that he really did anything that strong before that, but he tries to say that the sum total of what he did is better than what Michelle did, which it seems like a false deaf ears.
Real quick. So you can keep running through what everybody did since
Okay.
any commentary that I have, like specifically, I'll bring back, but I don't think
Okay. So the next person is Joe, and he's one of the people that we are in little doubt over who he's going to vote for, and sure enough, he is the second vote that Aubrey received. But he says he's going to focus on Ty and Aubrey, which is interesting, just given that everybody else seems to think that Michelle is the other competitor. So to leave her out it's not clear why, but Debbie kind of did the same thing. Joe says that Ty is a very truthful man. He's very honest and basically wants him to say, so if you're such an honest guy, try to explain why you think you are more accomplished than Aubrey. And Ty does the best he can with very pat sounding, buzzwords, because it's really kind of it. What can he say? There's nothing. But Joe calls it a good answer, which I said, okay, fine. And then he gives Aubrey a layup. And this is where she points out that she was on the right side of every vote since the merge, and that Ty wouldn't have made any moves at all if not for her talking him into it. Which, this was the stuff that really persuaded me. I was kind of inclined to like Aubrey. I've been sort of rooting for Aubrey for a while now. And not that I don't like Michelle, but it's just kind of inclined towards her to begin with. And then hearing that stuff was a big part of what informed my own feelings on it. But I guess not everybody else was persuaded.
No.
Then we have Jason, who says, it's truth time. And he doesn't know who he's voting for. And I'm like, yeah, okay. He asks Michelle what I thought was a good question, which is, you were left out of a crucial strategy decision, and that would seem to have left you and Julia on the bottom at that point. How did you manage to talk your way back into the inner circle? That's a good question, right? In terms of, that was one of the distinct strategic moves that she made that I thought was, that's where I think she really came into her own from a strategy perspective.
Right. It was basically like, I don't know who I'm voting for. I want it to be you, so I'm going to tee you up with this question. If you answer it correctly, then you have my vote. If you don't, then I probably just rip up my vote and throw it away.
Yeah.
Or just randomly vote for Ty, who can't, that was basically what he was saying. Is I'm not voting for Aubrey, but my vote's not decided that I want to give it to you. I want you to sell me on it. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I think Michelle, once that happened, it really was a fork in the road for her, in the sense that what she could have done at that point was stick with Julia, with whom she was also on the outs. Are you're grabbing something on the camera?
That was a bug.
Okay. So she was left out with Julia, and could have stuck with Julia and worked with her to try to splinter the inner group to bring someone over to their side, and instead chose to make it look like, oh, no, I was really with them all along. Sure, they didn't tell me, but that's fine. I'm going to vote with them to get out Julia. That was a decision point. And she made what I think clearly in retrospect was the right decision. It's kind of, if we're going by the results, then it's obviously the right decision.
It was.
Yeah, but I think that is definitely where her game kind of crystallized and started coming into focus, of her making what is not necessarily the obvious decision at that point, and what turned out to be the right one. So I'll definitely give Michelle credit for that. And Jason, despite his protestation of not knowing who he's going to vote for, I think it's exactly what you said, which is, I want to give Michelle an opportunity to sell herself. And I also tend to agree that it would have been a real uphill climb for him to vote for either Ty or Aubrey, because Aubrey was the one that talked Ty into betraying him. So it was like, he's not going to be inclined to vote for either of them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So when he comes in there and says, "Oh, my vote's up for grabs," it's like, like you said, is it really?
Yeah.
Is it really? You know,
Mm-hmm. And then he asked, well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Those two turned on you.
Yeah.
And not, like, I guess Aubrey did it in a strategic manner. Ty just did it because he was following Aubrey. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then he asks Ty, like, why did you turn on Scott and I? And despite being interrupted by Mark the chicken sitting on his lap starting to freak out, has a fairly good answer just of the bare emotional truth of the situation, which was, it was obvious to me that you two were closer to each other than you were to me, and I didn't feel like I related to you very well. Your personal styles and your way of playing the game were different than what I wanted to do. Therefore, it's like, that's why.
Yep.
It's like it wasn't because I was mad at you or anything like that, but it just, I did not feel like I was really, a part of your core. It felt a little bit like I don't belong here. Let's actually take that this moment though as an opportunity to say, not that I would necessarily suggest that Ty is quite this calculated, but bringing Mark the chicken was a good move, right? I mean, it's not only interesting for the show, just for us as viewers, but come on, he's got a pet. He's got an animal companion with him there at Tribal Council. Like, even though he didn't get any votes, like, that's still...
Yeah, if your goal is to win the likability vote...
Yeah.
Which, he managed to get Sia to come give him $50,000 for his...
Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Did you even know who Sia was? I didn't. I looked her up since, but...
Yes, but not... I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I only figured it out slightly before because her tour got announced in Austin a little bit before this happened, and I looked her up when that happened.
Okay.
And I was familiar with the stuff that she's part of. I actually didn't know who she was until maybe a month before this happened, and so I knew who she was at the time. But yeah,
so for
with you that I am.
Yeah. So for any listeners who still don't know, she's a pop star, I guess. Although probably some of her bigger success has actually come from writing songs that other artists used, like Diamonds by Rihanna, for example. That was the one that stood out to me in the list. But she's apparently been even more successful at writing songs for other people than when she's done her own stuff, but she's also done her own stuff.
But that's all very recent, so
mm-hmm.
she's like 40 years old
mm-hmm.
and been in that world for a long time because she's been a songwriter. So
mm-hmm.
she's been a part of a lot of really popular stuff, but has only recently become a name. Like, she's had albums for 20 years, but no one's paid attention to them until recently, at least as far as I could tell. So when that all happened, I mean, at first I'm just like confused because I'm thinking, wait, what is happening? Who is this person? What is that? What's the deal with that hat and that wig and that coat? Yeah, she acted bizarrely on the show.
Yeah, and then Probst was like, "Oh, I can confirm that this is Sia," and I'm like, "Who?" And I was trying to. It's like I was trying to think, like, well, is this someone from the show? Is this a player that I'm not remembering? And why is she dressed like that? And what's going on? And obviously, the idea that she's contributing her own money both for, the animal rights charity and as just sort of a fan favorite type of thing for Ty. I mean, that's very cool, but I'm still just befuddled during that whole sequence because I'm just thinking, I don't know who this is. Why is she dressed like that? What is going on? and yet Probst seemed to know who she was, and so that's why I was trying to think like, but what? Huh? And so then when I started looking her up and saw that she's a pop star, the cynic side of me immediately starts thinking, oh, is this just like some cynical, like, I'm getting attention for myself thing? But the more I looked up about her, suggests to me that that's not what's going on here, because over the course of her career, apparently her like social phobia and dislike of the trappings of being famous have been significant, things influencing her career decisions. And so the idea that she would do something attention grabbing like this just for the publicity seems like that would be very atypical of her past behavior.
Right, which is part of like with like the whole like social phobia thing of like wearing the wig that goes over her face and like yeah, she's kind of odd, but
yeah. So that was super weird when that happened on the live reunion show.
Weird, and remains like the primary memory of mine of the reunion show. Honestly.
How could it not be? I just mean like that's.
I don't really remember much else, and I didn't take it.
It was so clearly unplanned too, because Probst is just trying to get on with this other thing, and then someone's yelling at him from the crowd, and he's like, "Wait, okay, what's happening?" And it's like he's not sure whether he should try to continue what he's doing or acknowledge what's happening in the crowd. And then she's rushing the stage, and he's like, "Okay, I guess this is happening." And so that was all. It was very weird but entertaining, and I am absolutely happy at the idea that Ty is going to get $50,000 and $50,000 to an animal charity because of happiness that he is spreading the idea that you can be kind to animals. I like all of that.
Yes.
Anyway, though, got on to all of that because, of course, Ty had Mark the Chicken on his lap in the Final Tribal Council. But to just jump back to finishing that, we still have Sydney and Scott. Sydney asks, was it always the plan to get her out when she went out? But Aubrey basically says, no, it was going to be Michelle, but then Michelle won immunity and there was nothing we could do. So it was only you because Michelle was immune. And, basically gives a flattering, answer to that. But I guess it wasn't enough. Although Sydney is not necessarily surprising that she might have voted for Michelle because she had a close relationship with Michelle for a while. They definitely started to click once Michelle worked her way back into that circle. And then Scott, was, determined to be the wacky guy on do his won't be long now and doing his whole little weird dance thing. I'm left still not really liking him very much.
Fair enough.
He does accurately point out that Ty, you had so many advantages and you failed to use any of them well in any kind of a successful way. But then in a hostile tone, he asks Aubrey, like, why should I vote for you? And like, I mean, even if he wants to vote for Michelle more, and maybe he's just mad at Aubrey for being in opposition to him, I didn't quite get the hostility. Do you think it's just because he's like maybe mad at her for talking Ty away from him?
I mean, maybe. That's as far as I could tell. You know.
Yeah, because he definitely gave her tone of voice when he asked the question.
Oh yeah.
But then basically he illustrates kind of what we've said about his take on Michelle, which is that earlier in the season he wouldn't have thought Michelle would have even be worth considering, but she got stronger as they got weaker, is what he says. But, you know, I mean, I don't know that I agree that Aubrey got weaker exactly, but certainly Michelle got stronger, and she played a very solid game. Like once the gears started, engaging, I guess, she really played a very strong game from there through to the end. So in any case, they do get final statements. Aubrey talks about having a rough start, but her game evolved. She made hard decisions, and she talks about the ultimate survivor moment of making fire, which kind of, as we've talked about a couple of times, it still feels like she still didn't really do great at the fire making challenge. It was just that she was up against Sydney, who failed to produce anything. So, and it was kind of an ultimate survivor moment, except that the others might be feeling like you really only won because Sydney was even worse. But I wonder too, when she talks about the rough start, I wonder if that's part of it too, is that she really did have a rough start, like especially with the emotional outbursts where she was like having a panic attack. She had to kind of be talked down. I wonder if there's an aspect to that first impression of her that she never quite overcame in the way that Michelle did overcome the first impression they had of her. That might be. Ty says, I loved his final statement as life philosophy, even still it had nothing to do with telling people they should vote for him, but just as spinning into a philosophical statement on life can be about goodness. We don't have to backstab each other. We cling to one another, even though sometimes the wind and waves will blow us apart. And I hope that the relationships will last. And it's all very nice. And I loved every minute of it, with just the caveat of I don't think it's going to convince anybody to vote for him. It doesn't even really seem intended for that purpose. So I liked what he said, even though it's not a good argument for voting for him. But then, Michelle, I'll definitely give her the credit of a really solid final argument of first getting a little emotional at the idea that people thought she wasn't playing an emotional or an intelligent game. But she had to fight her way to the end, had to have faith in herself when everybody else thought she was at the bottom. She's feeling like she's emotional that people were maybe initially dismissing her, but she's proud of how she's gotten to where she is and how she played the game. And I'll definitely give her credit that was a very strong closing statement. All right. So as we go into the votes, did you have any more thoughts on the statements in the Tribal Council?
Nope.
All right. So the votes that we see Julia voting for Michelle, saying, "I promised you I would," which, like, even at that point, I'm still thinking Aubrey's getting more votes, because that one felt like, "I promised you that I would." It's more like, well, Aubrey played the better game, but I want to give you my vote because I promised you that would. That's what it felt like to me.
Yep.
And then Joe votes for Aubrey, saying, "I'm proud of you. Way to go for the Brains Tribe." And then we have another nice emotional moment with Ty of saying goodbye to Mark the Chicken. It's up to fate now. And again, it's like, it's not a good reason to vote for him to win the money, but boy, it's good TV. I like Ty an awful lot, even if I don't think he's a great Survivor player.
Yep.
Hashtag buy Mark. I have since read that apparently Mark was given to a local family, and we hope that means as a pet.
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
but
I suspect it, yes. All right, so this is where we zip to the live finale, the live reunion part. My wardrobe notes are that Michelle's neckline in her dress that she's wearing for the finale is really low. It's like a V, like between her breasts. It was just, not that it was that extreme, but it was just like a little bit like, oh, okay, that's a little bit more risque than I might have made. It's a different decision than I would have made, but okay, all right. And then Jason's jacket is, I'm biased by already not liking him, but I rolled my eyes at his jacket because it felt like an affectation to me.
Well, let's take a step back and remember that this is a year after.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
A year has gone by since they completed this season.
Right, because if people don't remember, they filmed and then aired the last two seasons in a flipped order.
Right. So I guess I give a little leeway to people who have been sitting around as part of a season that never aired for a year and then are doing the reunion. Yeah, if they want to have something a little affectatious, yeah, all right, go ahead, you know?
Okay, fair enough. I wasn't really trying to be.
I'm like when that clicked, I was like, holy shit! Like they finished the other part of this a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wear a goofy chip.
Yeah. So in any case, we have the votes, and as previously discussed, Michelle wins. And did you have any sense of who you thought was going to win before the votes were read?
No.
You thought it could really go either way?
I honestly thought it could go either way between the two of them.
Right. Yeah, I don't think anyone really thought that was going to win.
Yeah. I thought it might have been like a 4-3.
Mm-hmm.
So 5-2 was a little more than I expected, but yeah, I honestly thought it could have been either. I didn't think Aubrey had it down coming out of that tribal council.
Yeah.
So.
So as previously discussed, on first viewing, I was really just kind of stunned because I thought Aubrey had it locked, which again was not an indictment of Michelle as much as I just thought Aubrey was stronger. But as we've kind of talked through it, I think there were some of the clues there that I was missing, perhaps just by confirmation bias. So in any case, I'm certainly not heartbroken. I like Michelle a lot. I think that she did a great job. So no bitterness.
Well, here's a question also, by the way. You didn't watch the episode till yesterday, right?
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Were you not spoiled?
Oddly enough, the only thing that I was spoiled on was that it was a woman that won, which was not much of a spoiler given the final film.
That's not a spoiler.
I know, yeah. So, but I had successfully avoided any spoilers other than that. And it probably would have been more difficult, except that I was literally out of town doing things all day that didn't involve just trolling around on Facebook all day. And
Good.
and if that was not true, then I probably would have watched it sooner anyway. So
Yeah.
so I wasn't spoiled largely on the basis of being too busy to, spend much time where I would get spoiled.
But still, you managed to make it like 5 days without.
Yeah, basically all I saw was an Arrested Development joke quote version of the spoiler, which was just to say, her? Which, I don't know. If you didn't watch Arrested Development, that's not going to make any sense.
Yeah.
But that, because the nature of that joke, it seemed like it would be more likely to have been either Aubrey or Michelle as opposed to Sydney, just because the nature of that joke, for anyone who hasn't watched Arrested Development, is that one of the main characters, his teenage son, has a girlfriend. That the joke about the girlfriend is that she's just kind of very plain and boring and uninteresting, according to the dad. The son likes her fine. And so it's just, he seems to be just constantly mystified that there would be anything to like about her, and why his son is interested in her, and why she continues to be this presence in their life. And he's just like, her? And so that suggested to me, from whoever posted it, that they thought that the person who won was maybe somewhat surprising or like unexpected. Or not necessarily that, but just maybe like, I don't see the appeal, or something like that. And that, just of the three women, I felt like this particular person would be more likely to say that about Aubrey or Michelle than Sydney, just based on the nature of who those three personalities are. But again, that's literally all the one word was the only level of spoiler that I got. Honestly, in retrospect, I wonder if that contributed to my feeling either, because maybe I was subconsciously more inclined to believe that this guy would have said that about Aubrey compared to Michelle. I don't know. But in any case, so we have the finale here, and Michelle basically says that she thinks that a big part of her win was this idea of, because she hadn't done a lot early on, people had this one impression of her, and then she really, disproved that, and that everyone was so impressed by her disproving that initial impression that's what got her the win. I think she, as we've kind of talked about, that does seem to be what happened. And then Aubrey talks about being a Cochrane type, and being emotionally honest, like her willingness to talk about, her feelings of anxiety or panic attacks and that sort of thing, being pretty open about that stuff in the confessionals. And then we have the discussion of Ty as the new survivor archetype. And then this is where all the CS stuff happened. And then followed by a self-described bizarre transition to Drew Carey, which was basically just an ad for a Survivor edition of Price is Right, I guess. I like Drew Carey, but yeah, that really felt like it was really just kind of like, hey, everybody, this thing's happening. You might be interested, so let's talk about it for a little bit. We get...
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine. I don't object to that. It's what TV networks do. We're promised updates with the evacuees, but we really only talk to Caleb. And then we get an interview with Dr. Joe, which I really appreciated, just especially since we've talked about this season, especially just in the sense of, do we think maybe they overdid it in a couple places this season? You know, like what is the line where we want the game to be hard, but not so hard that it causes this kind of stuff, you know, and like maybe they're writing it too far, you know, a little too close to the edge. But I liked the discussion of, you know, you don't always see them, but we do have the medical team always on hand, and they're always able to come in for these sorts of emergency situations when they happen. And then just even hearing him discuss this, you know, the emotional pressure of having to make these decisions for people when they know it'll be really upsetting. We talk a little bit with Scott, who says that Ty did lose his vote at the betrayal with the Super Idol, and I'm thinking, okay, I mean, that's kind of meaningless because that happened so far away from the actual finish that, like, would you have really voted for Ty otherwise? I doubt it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. It was like who you were angry at Ty at that point, but you had no idea who he was going to be going against.
mm-hmm.
So, like, he didn't. You could say he lost your vote, but yeah, you were basically saying, I don't really want to vote for this guy after he did that. So
Mm-hmm.
he makes it to the end. I'm gonna have to seriously consider it. But you know, as far as like, yeah,
Yeah. So
it would have mattered who he was going against. Is what I'm saying.
So we have we talked to Debbie, and she's aware of how eccentric she is. You know, she is, quote, in on the joke, as Jeff puts it. Gives another brief list of all the different things that she's done. I like Debbie. I wouldn't mind having her come back for another season, honestly. And Julia was young. That's the only note I have about that. Although I honestly, I didn't dislike Julia either, honestly, especially towards the end of her game. She seemed, well, you know, somewhat like Michelle did. She sharpened up a little bit compared to where she was at the beginning. Next season, I have really mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, I'm excited when Jeff calls the location his favorite location ever in Fiji. I am not enthralled by millennials versus Gen X. And I am especially not enthralled by all these clips of the contestants trotting out the most cliched, ridiculous garbage about this cultural differences between millennials and Gen Xers. God, I was just like gag. That was really off-putting for me, honestly. Because I think all that's really stupid, personally.
All of it is really stupid. It's particularly for you and I think, extra hard to deal with because we technically like fall right on the bandwidth. So, well, like by traditional definitions, we're like, I guess we're Gen X, but
I think of the two, we're more on that side, but it's...
Yeah, we're so far at the end that we're also in like the beginning of the millennials. So like you and I have affinities for both, and so that already makes it like more difficult for the two of us.
My take on it,
and you play all these tropes, and it's just it's so over the top.
So like being kind of in this weird fuzzy boundary, kind of being in that space where it starts saying, well, okay, well, what is the year that divides the two? Is there a Gen Y that's in between X and millennials? Who cares is my take on it, is that it's all stupid and meaningless because I don't believe that the generational differences exist in the way they're described. I think it is made up because people want to be able to divide people into categories. And so while you have some people that are this stereotypical millennial who are young, there were always people like that. And while you have this stereotype of what a Gen Xer is, there are young people like that now. There are people of all these types in all of these supposed generations, and the artificial distinction drives me bonkers. I hate every news story about it. And then on top of that, all these testimonials were like super cliche and forced, and I was really not happy about it.
Yes. So while my point of us sort of falling in the middle makes us even, it just primes us to be more sensitive to these kind of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I read an article the other day about, marketing segmentation, like a normal article. But the guy is British and makes some smart ass comments sometimes. And he was saying something like, hey, if you ever have a consultant in to assist you with X, Y, and Z, one of the ways to tell that they're absolutely terrible at their job is if they tell you that they are good at millennial marketing. Because let me tell you what, millennials don't fit any segment that we ever market to. Because all you're talking about, you're just talking about an age range when preferences and like the things that they're interested in are so diverse that anybody who would want to categorize that and say we're going to promote this to millennials is clearly an idiot. That's what he said in his article. He's like, anything that you ever want to market to an entire generation of people as one market segment, that makes you stupid, basically. Yeah. Because you're like what you said, it's so
what this is perpetually and has been since the dawn of time probably, these so-called cultural differences of the different generations is all about people who are aged 35 through 50 trash talking people who are 20 through 35. That's what it always has been, and that's what it always will be. Because once you're in that older age range, you look back at the younger people and say, those people are stupid. But I wasn't stupid when I was their age, so it must be that they're different somehow. It seems like it's a very obvious phenomenon to me, and it drives me bonkers. So yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine, and it sounds like to some extent at least yours too. Hopefully, like many of these themes, it will be something that disappears 1/3 into the season when they do a tribe mix-up.
Yes.
Because I think there's not really been very many of these themed splits that really did anything for me in a profound way.
They just try to get people to view it at the beginning.
Yeah.
But the reality is, they're pulling 10 million viewers an episode, and they're winning their night.
Yeah.
So Survivor, what season are we in? 39?
This is going to be 33 is the next 33?
One. Yeah. 33 seasons, and it's pulling 10 million viewers and winning its
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing something right.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, if the goal is to get people to tune in, there does seem to be a lot of interest in people writing stories about what are millennials like, what do they do.
Yes. Look at any of your stuff that you see, like any of your clickbait is always categorizing people and making top 5, 7, 8, 10 lists. Like the top 5 reasons that millennials can't win Survivor. Like, that's a clickbait.
Yeah. So anyway,
the Gen X has too
too old to win Survivor. You know?
Yeah. So I don't know. Well, we'll see.
Anyway,
hopefully that won't make the season unwatchable. I doubt that it will, but I reserve the right to be annoyed whenever they talk about that part of it. But yeah, hey, maybe, you never know. Lots of great seasons have come from bizarre initial themes.
yes.
And who knows, maybe there might even be a handful of people who come on the show and conclude that it's a dumb way to divide people.
It might happen.
Yeah.
It did remind me of something that clickbaited me a while ago that I thought was hilarious. Do you want to see the #1 Harry Potter actor transformation?
So here, let me make sure that it'll. Yeah, there we go. Dobby.
Yeah, it was Dobby. I've saved that because it reminds me of exactly like what clickbait is about.
Yeah. Just for anyone only listening in audio, it was a picture of Dobby the house elf from Harry Potter, and then a picture of Dobby's head on a very like a bodybuilder, muscle dude.
Yes, and it was the #1 Harry. You won't believe how this actor transformed from Harry Potter till now.
Mm-hmm.
And I clicked on it, and it was that. And
yeah. A friend of mine on Facebook has engaged in their own personal little crusade called #ScrewClickbait, where what they basically do is they'll link a clickbait like video or list or something, and take the bullet of actually going and seeing what it was. But when they link it, they just describe everything that's at the link, so you don't have to click it yourself.
A couple of things. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
But in any case, so I think that's probably it for this season of talking about Survivor. We'll be back in the fall with Survivor season 33. I don't remember what the subtitle was.
Gen X versus Millennials.
I guess so. Was that it? I mean, that's what they've said the theme was. I don't remember if that was the actual little caption. Called. Anyway, we'll see. All right. So thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. And, we'll be back this fall. And in the meantime, check out ChristianaEllis.com for other stuff that we're doing together and stuff that I do on my own and general sundry and stuff. I'm going to stop talking now. Good night, everybody.
Good night.